Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Response to Racism's community meeting. We are excited tonight um, for our meeting. And before I start to talk a little too much, let me just call on Olivia Chi to give us our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Willie. Okay. It is important to ground ourselves and acknowledge the people whose land we are utilizing: the Clackamas Chinook, the Wasco Wishram, the Willamette Tumwater, the Multnomah, and other Chinookan people, as well as the Tualatin Kalapuya, the Cayuse, the Molalla, and other tribes and bands of the Columbia and Willamette rivers. It is important to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land known as Lake Oswego, and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices that were forced upon them. We remember that we are guests of this land and the plants that make up this forest community. To follow our acknowledgement with action, we will continue to use our resources to prioritize partnerships with Indigenous tribes, tribal governments, and intertribal organizations.
Thank you, Olivia. This month, the month of May, is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And I always have to take a little bit of time to acknowledge someone. And tonight, Dawn, are you ready for me to acknowledge my special friends? So, the man at the top, his name is Jack Takayanagi, Reverend Jack. He was a minister. Um, and below is Reverend Jack and his wife Mary when they got married. And many years later, Reverend Jack passed away in 2015 at the age of 93. And he worked as long as he could in the field of social justice and racial justice. Mary is 97, and I'm hoping that she'll be able to get on tonight. If we find her, I'm going to have her highlighted. Her name is Mary Takayanagi at 97, and she's just trying to figure out how to do Zoom on her iPad. So give her give her time. She's had one lesson, so I'm hoping that she can get on and you can see her face. They're a wonderful couple, and the Oregon Historical Society has a bit on them. And so I encourage you to look up my friends. They're very special to me and to my family. Um, they were like a second layer parents for us and grandparents for my son. So I will not talk anymore. I'll go back to the script that I was given for the night. I sometimes follow directions and sometimes I don't. But tonight I'm going to try to do my best to be compliant. So tonight we're talking about our topic is anti-Asian hate. We need to talk about it. Let me say that one more time. Anti-Asian hate. We need to talk about it. This evening, we're so fortunate to have the opportunity to listen in on a conversation among generations of members of our AAPI community, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. They will share stories and experiences at school, at home, at work, and all around the community about the things that they've experienced. We've devoted most of the meeting time to this important conversation, so there will be no small group discussions this evening. One of our standing agreements is to step up and step back Well, tonight, our AAPI community has the mic. So Willie does not have the mic tonight. And so let us hear from the members of our Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And the rest of us will get to step back and listen deeply with full presence. They're sharing their stories tonight. Their stories are part of our history. We need to know about the people that make up this country and the experiences. So use the chat if you want to speak from your own experience. Please mute your mics so that there are no interruptions to this rich conversation. Our mission is to educate and empower the residents and institutions with the tools to combat racism in all its forms and make Lake Oswego and Oregon a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. The expected outcomes for the evening is that we'll get acquainted with who is in the room and wanting to respond to racism. We won't solve racism in 2 hours. You'll leave this meeting with more questions than you came with. It's my hope that after this meeting that you will take one actionable item, a way that you can, something that you can use to interrupt racism. And you'll have more ideas of how you can interrupt racism. So with that, I have to do my work, which is to take a poll. It's coming up right now. Takes you just seconds. John, are we ready? Okay, we are ready. How many times have you attended and respond to racism community meeting in the last 12 months? If this is your first time, or 2 to 6 times, 7 to 12 times. Again, we just want to know, how many times have you attended an RTR meeting? First time, 2 to 6 times, 7 to 12. And the second question is, what activities did you do last month? It's multiple choice. What have you done to interrupt racism? Even if you were not here at a meeting, and this is your first time, read through the questions and pick all that apply to you. And let's go for it if you haven't finished. How are we doing, Pat?
So please note that we're only doing question number 1 and number 2 at this point in time.
Oh, I saw. That's all I was showing. Okay.
The question number 3 we will be doing later on in the presentation.
Won't let us submit, Pat, unless you answer every question.
Oh, John.
It's a tech issue.
Okay, we'll be putting up poll number 3 again.
Poll number 3?
I mean, yeah, because it's John had put it as part of this poll, so it's important for us to get that information later. And so we'll be putting up number 3 at a later time as well.
Just can't do 1 and 2 right now.
Yes, yeah.
Submit it.
Move on, Willie.
Pardon me?
Go ahead and move on with your agenda.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So we have a guest. I hope he's here. It's Mayor Joe Buck here. If so, please make him center of attention for a moment.
I'm here, Lily.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our mayor is here to talk about open positions that we have, board positions and commissions, and things that you can work. You can work. This is our city, and we need to make it our city. And he's going to talk about it. And I hope many of you from this call will apply for one or two positions. You're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. Thanks for the opportunity. This is the time of year when the city recruits for our advisory boards and commissions. And we all know that we're a stronger community and we're a healthier community when we bring diverse perspectives, ideas, backgrounds to the table. And so that's why I'm here tonight, to encourage and to invite each and every one of you to apply to serve in your community in this capacity. We have advisory boards and commissions on a variety of topics, everything from our Planning Commission, Sustainability Advisory Board, Parks Board, Library Advisory Board, 50 Plus Advisory Board. And of course, we have this year a new advisory board that we're also recruiting for, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board. In addition to that, most of our advisory, well, all of the advisory boards contain at least one youth position in some. The Sustainability Advisory Board and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board include 2 youth positions. And so those are open to youth in the community between 16 and 18 years of age students. And so youth are encouraged to apply and adults as well. Our application process is open through the end of the month. And if you just go to the city's homepage, you'll see a tile there featured for the recruitment. And there's just a short application to fill out. And then you get to meet with members of the council and a community member that serves on the advisory board you're interested in applying to. And you are allowed to be interested in multiple boards, but there's only one interview. And I just really hope that you all give it some thought. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. My colleagues, Councillor Moop and Councillor Nguyen, are also on this call tonight. I am assured that they join me in this call for applications. And they'd also, any member of the council would be happy to answer questions. So I appreciate taking a few moments tonight to extend this invitation. Thank you to Respond to Racism for the opportunity.
Thank you. This is the first time we've had it so up close and personal. So thank you for inviting us to participate in the city. Okay, so I have our city is so busy. Our city council meetings, we've had people go and talk, and we appreciate that. The police department had the focus groups and loads of members of our community, and I don't remember numbers at all. And so if you have numbers, I don't want to put you on the spot. That would work, but they were there. You have any numbers about the policing focus groups?
I know that the focus groups, no, but I believe we had 280 surveys completed.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you. That's good. Good. And we had, 2 walks with a partnership with LO for Love. We had the meditation walk, and it was just, I don't even have the words for it. It was so touching and so meaningful. Before the actual walk, there were people sharing their stories, the adults and the youth, and they were heartbreaking just to listen to their stories. And we have to talk about it. That's why we're here tonight. Yes. We need to talk about what's happening to our people in our community. And So we had the meditation walk, which was a walk actually in the rain. In the rain. And people walked in silence, in a real silent meditation walk out in the rain. And it was so meaningful for me to see and feel the energy from the group. And then our young people put on a march, a rally. Sarah, are you on? I think I saw your name. We had,
Hi.
there you are. That young lady was the leader of this activity, and she's a student at the junior high school. But she led that march, and they had a rally, and we raised from the little rally $315 plus whatever came in as a donation online, and I don't have those numbers. And it was wonderful. The kids talked, they made signs, and I heard Sarah's lead. I didn't walk with them, but they walked, and I heard her voice. And I'm like, how come that big a voice come from this person here? But she was very much into it, and our youth are really active, and so let us support them. And thank you again, Sarah, for doing that. Anything you want to say?
No, I just want
Okay.
to thank you, Willie, a lot, and thank everybody for coming.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Okay. We just finished. I have to take a deep breath. The candidate form, and I hope that you had a chance to view it. We have 4 candidates who are running for school board member elections, and the 4 of them were there, and we had 4 moderators who were all high school students here in Lake Oswego who asked all of the questions, and they were good. They did a very good job of moderating and going through the program, and I want to thank the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network for partnering with Respond to Racism to put on the forum. And thanks again to the candidates and to our moderators for their participation. And Pat's face is on here, so I guess it's poll number 2. How active were you in last month's activities? What activities did you do? Are we doing that one now, Pat?
Well, they kind of answered it, so we can just move on, Willie.
They've already answered it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, I can move on to introduce our moderators for tonight. Is Kim V. Toe from Respond to, nope. Well, yeah, for Respond to Racism, but she's a chairperson with LO for Love. And Tam Hickson is the one that I'll Respond to Racism person. And she is the person who does a lot of our graphics. She's wonderful. And those social media posts for us and everything else that we ask her to do. So I will turn it over to Kim V and Tam.
Thank you, Willie, for always opening the meeting with your heart, and today especially for your support. Hi, everyone. Willie said it twice, but I will say it again. Anti-Asian hate. We need to talk about it. Who comes to mind when you see or hear the word Asian? Who is the we? And who is talking? Tonight, the we are a diverse group of your Asian neighbors. Our small group certainly does not represent the entire spectrum of Asian experiences, but we are speaking up so that we can begin to explore what has often been unspoken. We are taking up space and allowing you to listen in and learn from our intimate dialogue tonight. John, if you could cue the video and get ready. Last May, a Wyden and Kennedy affinity group created Call It COVID-19, and it was a response to the rising discrimination against Asians around the world as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. To set the stage for tonight's multi-generational discussion, we're going to show you the short video and ask that you watch with intention and attention. Please note there are graphic images and language that may be triggering. So please take care of yourself first and foremost. John, whenever you're ready, you can hit play.
A word, please. A word is just a word is just a word is not just a word, not once it's been heard. It becomes a belief, a reason for someone's grief. Fear, confusion causes actions. A sign on a restaurant window, Chinese not welcome here. A slur on a car door, fucking chink, go home, disappear. A clenched fist meets her back, her arms, her face. Get out of our United States. Her face, her face, her face. A face spit on, kicked on, painted on, disinfectant sprayed on, acid splashed on, knife slashed on. No, you're right. You weren't holding that knife. How could you have known? How could you possibly know what a word could do unless it was said about you? How could you know that negative comments about people of Asian descent increased 167% a week after a word was said? Now it's too late to take it back. Now we're just barely keeping track of over 1,000 reports of discrimination and counting, and that's just counting the ones that were reported. What about the ones that were left unsaid? How many thought this can't be happening? And if it is, should I even say anything? I'm just grateful to be here. So, what actually happened? How could you know? How could you know what it feels like to call your parents, not just to talk, not to ask them, hey, how was your walk, but to ask them, please don't go outside. There's something happening worldwide. Mom, cover up not just your nose, your mouth, but your eyes, your hair, your voice. You hide everything about yourself. Don't let them see you. Don't let them recognize you. This virus does not discriminate. People do. But hey, it's just a word, right? How could you know what a word could do unless it was said about you? Unless you were me? Then maybe you'd call it COVID-19. Good evening, everyone. As Willie said, my name is Kim Vito, and I am honored to be here tonight to help guide the conversation with Tam. Before we start, I just want to quickly define some terms that you'll hear throughout the evening. The term AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islander, and the term API stands for Asian Pacific Islander. I tend to default to API because it's shorter and I believe it's more inclusive, but throughout the program tonight, you'll hear those terms and sometimes just simply Asian, and they'll be used interchangeably. So please understand that when we use those terms, we broadly mean to encompass all people who identify as Asian Pacific Islander. So let's begin. Going back to the video, I want us all to just take a moment to think about what we just watched. I know it's a lot to process in 2 minutes, and that's intentional. The range of emotions and the intensity of emotions triggered by the video, we believe represents what a lot of people are feeling in the Asian community right now.
We're going to talk a lot about how the API community is not a monolith, that no one person is representative of the community. And I know I certainly can't speak for all Asians, but I would like to share a bit about some of the emotions that come up for me when I watch the video. And in doing so, I hope it'll give you all a sense of what some in our community are feeling. So when I watch the video, I am overwhelmed with many different and intense emotions. I feel first anger and fear that is rooted in the present, but also other emotions that are rooted in my past and in my identity as an Asian American living and growing up in this country. So let's talk about those emotions that are rooted in the present, anger and fear. I remember the first time I heard the words China virus and Kung flu. It was like a punch to the gut. I knew it would put our community in danger. But really, you didn't need to be a rocket scientist to know that. We all remember what it was like in 2016, that crazy campaign leading up to the election and what it was like after the election. Our country was going through a period of reckoning. People who would otherwise be silent were suddenly emboldened by our elected leaders to openly express their hatred and bigotry. Hate crimes spiked across the board against all BIPOC, not just against Asians. So when COVID happened, the stage had already been set. The country had been primed to hate and scapegoat and find a racial group to direct their fear and anger and frustration towards. And we've seen this play out time and time again in our country's history. You know, I consider myself a pretty level-headed person, but, you know, after months of waking up day after day, turning on the news and just seeing someone who looks like my dad, or who looks like my mom, or my aunt or my uncle being beaten, stomped on, harassed, spat on, robbed, and even killed, it gets to you. It gets to all of us. I've had many conversations with my parents about how to be safe, how to take precautions. You know, I've even looked up, you know, whistles and mace that they can carry. So the anger that a lot of us feel and the fear that we feel is very real. Because what happened was the words that were used to cause all of this were avoidable and reckless, and they put all of us in danger. So let's move on to the emotions that I feel that are rooted in my past and in my identity. So a bit about me. My parents are Vietnamese refugees. They immigrated to the United States like so many other Vietnamese immigrants in 1975 after the fall of Saigon. My dad was an Army engineer. He fought alongside American troops for the South Vietnamese Army. So in 1975, in that spring, he knew he had to escape. He knew he had to evacuate. He was 25 years old. And so luckily he was injured and he was home in Saigon when, you know, the Viet Cong were about to storm the capital. And so within an hour's notice, when he had the opportunity, he said his goodbyes and he left with the clothes on his back and a small brick of gold that his parents had given him. He didn't speak any English. He didn't know anyone in America. You know, that's his story. And my mother's story is similar and similarly harrowing. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was born in Salem and I went to school, middle school and high school in Portland. I went to Lincoln High School in downtown Portland. At the time, it was a predominantly white high school. So I grew up being friends, going to school, and just walking through life with people who did not look like me. To me, it was a given that I wouldn't be represented in the sitcoms and movies I watched, the music I listened to, the books I read, or even the teachers who I admired. You know, I grew up as a kid, that kid looking in the mirror, wishing my skin was a different color, my hair was a different texture, my eyes were a different shape. I remember my nickname in high school was Token, because even amongst my best friends, I was the token Asian in the group. You know, all of this was normal. People in those days just didn't talk about racism the way that they do now. And I could go on. I have a lot more examples about, you know, what it was like being in my 20s and going through my law career, being in, you know, a law firm and professional settings. But this is the type of racism I've encountered in my life. The where are you really from? And wow, your English is so good type of subtle microaggressions, not the overt go back to your country type of racism that my parents endured. So how did I deal with this adversity? How did my parents teach me to deal with it? First of all, we never talked about it. I just learned to deal with it. I call it the immigrant way. You keep your head down, you work hard, you don't complain, you try to fit in. Basically, just be silent. So bringing all of this back to the video, when I and other people who look like me hear the words China virus and Kung flu, it not only endangers us in the present, it triggers an avalanche of emotions that stem from a lifetime of hurt and pain and dealing with racist stereotypes that are so pervasive, so persistent, and so ingrained in the fabric of our country's history and culture that even we, Asians, the ones being oppressed, have internalized it. In other words, we walk around every day feeling and sometimes even believing that we don't belong, that we're outsiders, that we're not good enough, that we're not American, that we will always be a perpetual foreigner, no matter what we do or what we say. Add to that, there's this tendency, this belief that Asians should just suffer in silence, that we should just be grateful to be here, that we should ignore the racism or work our way around the racism. And these are things that we have been taught by our society, our institutions, and sometimes even our parents. And they are things that many of us are actively trying to unlearn, particularly during this unprecedented time of reckoning that our country is going through. So that's my story, or part of my story. Tonight, you are going to hear many more stories from a multi-generational panel composed of amazing students and adult members of our community. We span different generations, different ages, different gender identities, ethnic backgrounds. And as this panel will prove, Asians are not a monolith. As a people, we are diverse, and our stories and backgrounds are unique and valuable. Our goal in sharing with all of you our stories, our pain, our trauma, and our joy is to foster understanding and empathy. And from there, hopefully, allyship, solidarity, and community. So here's how the rest of tonight will go. I will next introduce the speakers on our panel. We will have our dialogue, and at the end of it, Tam and I will close with final remarks and share some resources and ideas on what you can do to support the API community. So first, I want to introduce Dia Aurora. She is a sophomore at Lake Oswego High School. She's Indo-American and is one of the leaders of the Asian American Student Union, or AASU. In her free time, she enjoys swimming, hiking, and hanging out with her friends. Next, we have Alicia Lee. She is a Chinese American sophomore at LO High, co-leader of the school's AASU, and a member of the Green Team. In her free time, she loves teaching martial arts to students of all ages. I've seen her teach, she's amazing. Olivia Chi is a 17-year-old junior at LO High. She's on the LO cheer team and enjoys being in nature and spending time with friends. She's also a Korean American leader for AASU. Moving on to the adults in our panel, we have Coach Marshall Cho. He is the current head boys basketball coach at LO High. During his 15-year coaching career, he has worked with players from high school to collegiate to NBA levels. Coach Cho graduated from the University of Oregon with a BS in Business Administration and holds an MA from Columbia University Teachers College in Secondary Mathematics and Education. He and his wife, Connie, are Lake Oswego residents, raising 2 kids, Nathaniel and Emma. Next, we have Neelam Gupta. She is a South Asian American who is honored to serve on the Lake Oswego School Board as the first person of color. More importantly, she is a parent to Ria, an 8th grader at LO Junior High. Neelam is the Director of Clinical Supports, Integration, and Workforce at the Oregon Health Authority. Neelam has devoted her career to advancing health equity and systemic change, and she is an active school and community volunteer. Neelam earned a master's degree in public health and in social welfare from UCLA. Next, we have Dr. Weiwei Liu. She is a Chinese native who worked as an educator for K through 12, as well as higher education in China and in the United States for over 4 decades. She currently serves as the C4 board chair of Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, or APANO, and a member of the Social Services Funding Committee of the City of Beaverton. Dr. Liu taught graduate level courses such as race and identity, culturally responsive education, and history of immigration. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Daniel Nguyen. He is a restaurateur, business professional, and community volunteer. Daniel was born to Vietnamese refugee parents and raised in the Pacific Northwest. His educational and professional background includes economic development, construction administration, and hospitality management. Daniel currently serves on the Lake Oswego City Council and was the first person of color to be elected to a seat on the council 3 years ago. Welcome everyone to our panel, and thank you speakers for joining us tonight and engaging in this important community discussion. We are so fortunate to have such a broad range of backgrounds and experience to learn from. So let's begin. I'm going to ask a series of questions along with Tam, and they're going to be open-ended. So we might pick on the first speaker, but we're hoping that the rest of our panel can kind of keep the conversation going. The first question is, what is painful or difficult about being API? And Dr. Liu, I'm gonna, as the most wise, at least in age, person on our panel, I'm gonna start with you, and also because you said you had an answer that you'd like to share. So Dr. Liu, take it away.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Also, I would like to say hello to my friend, Willie. Do you remember me, Willie? Also, I think I also saw Ed Bentoncourt somewhere, right? Okay, so hello. I am so glad to have the opportunity to talk to all of you about what it means to be Asian. And I'm also very touched by what Kimmy said earlier. And that feeling and the frustration are definitely shared by so many. As a grandparent, I definitely hope that my grandchildren and my children do not have to constantly feel that way, although that is the reality. The one thing I always feel that's not a surprise of where we are is that for the past 30 years I've been in this country, there has always been some form of discrimination against Asians or AAPI population in a very different form. As I shared with, as I shared in my bio, I taught race and identity in the School of Education in the local colleges to the teachers or the people who are going to be teachers. The one thing that's very different about the AAPI experience is that sometimes we are caught in the middle. We are in the middle or between one group and the other group simply because we were perceived as being a silent group. For instance, I was a director or one of the 6 directors in the school district for over 10 years. Guess what? People, or some people, never really tried to remember my name. As you can see, my name is actually quite simple. It repeats itself, right? Simply because there are only 2 of us or 3 of us who were administrators, some people thought that they could just call us in somebody else's name because we all look alike, right? At first, I let it go, and that was clearly a mistake. But after I corrected them, things did not change. They still call me by somebody else's name. And the strange thing is, I am 20 years senior of the person that they call me for. That is really, really hard to take when that type of behavior went on and on and on, year after year. And I don't think I should be that invisible, because I was one of 6 directors next to the assistant superintendent. So that type of behavior is really, really hurting. And I don't think that many people realize how much they are hurting us. I also would like to quote something from this book that I'm reading that's called Caste. It's one of the best sellers. I like this book so far because it really talks about something that's happening in this country in addition to race theory, right? What happens here on page 187 is that the author discussed the discriminatory behavior that is very implicit. See, the people who call me by another name is doing something like that. This person never said, I am going to discriminate you. I have prejudice against you. Yet, this book continues. Such a behavior, implicit behavior, is activated more quickly and effortlessly than conscious discrimination, more quickly than saying, I've decided to discriminate against this person, because it is an automatic process and it's an unconscious process. People who engage in this unthinking discrimination are not aware of it, or they choose not to be aware of it. So I just want to let you all know that being AAPI means we are also humans. We are just like all of you. We are humans. We have feelings. We have our own identity. We look different, but we are humans. So treat us so.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. I think that's so right. Just some of the things that you were saying about feeling invisible and the implicit bias. The first thing that came to mind to me was just when people treat you that way, it's because of a lack of humanity. It's because they don't see you as an equal to them. And so therefore they don't take the time to learn your name, right? Does anyone else have anything to say to follow Dr. Liu on our panel? Anyone like to share their thoughts?
Dia, can I invite you in? I know that you had some thoughts you wanted to share. Feel free to unmic.
Sure. Well, I wanted to talk about a similar experience that Dr. Liu had. So like in middle school or in high school, I'm like one of the only like few South Asian Americans in our community. And like when there's other South Asian kids in our class, I get called by their name because I am like they assume that I look similar to them. And they don't do it like they constantly do it over and over again, which kind of gets to me at times because like we don't look similar at all and we have different names, but I constantly get called by their name, which I thought was like disturbing at times. And also one thing that's hard about me being in the API community is the model minority myth and like people assuming that I fit into that myth. And this is pretty hard for me because I feel like the need to like fit into that model minority myth, which is hard for me at times because then I feel pressured to be like good at math or like amazing at sports, which I'm not. And if I don't achieve them, I somehow feel like left out.
Thank you, Dia. Olivia, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, kind of going off like what Dia said about like the model minority myth. I think it also like pits Asian people against other minorities because like obviously like the model minority myth is like meant to just like alienate other people from each other, and so the minorities can't like come together as a whole. And it's kind of hard thing, like you can't like fit in with white people, but you also can't fit in with like other minorities. And also like with the model minority myth, like I feel like sometimes you can't like attain those standards that like people set for you. So it just makes you feel like very alone and very just like not really knowing where you fit in at all.
So many of us nodding. Neelam, would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, no, I could say easily ditto to what my fellow panelists have shared. In particular, I also wanted to share, this idea of invisible labor that a lot of people of color, and in particular Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we face because we're seen as hardworking and compliant. And so, we often say yes to taking on tasks and additional assignments, thinking that, by our hard work, we're going to get credit, but we don't always get credit. We don't always get advanced. So that's, one issue I've encountered personally. And then relating also to what some of the other panelists said earlier was really the stigma around mental health issues. In particular, I think it takes a toll on us and we don't, talk about it. We don't have culturally specific mental health providers we can go to. who understand our issues and our background. And so that's, another huge area of need. And, I would really like to see, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to actually talk about it.
Thank you, Neelam. Daniel, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted just to say thank you, Neelam, for the concept of invisible labor. I think that's something that, certainly in the work that I do, oftentimes I meet lots of different people, right, and lots of different backgrounds, and oftentimes people say, oh, they find out that I have a restaurant business, and I love Vietnamese. In fact, I have great friends that are Vietnamese, or I know a Vietnamese person that. So it's as if that all of a sudden they have an Asian friend that they are not racist, or so they're quick to want to be able to distance themselves from those that they feel are that they're not them. But I think this idea about this invisible labor, and I think that sometimes we in our everyday lives, I think to those that are non-Asian or allies, for example, the greater white community. Just think about next time you go out to eat, and I don't know how many times we've been out to eat, and people will describe their different dining experiences, for example. And when it comes around to going to an Asian restaurant, it's always, oh, the price is so cheap and you get so much, and you don't have to tip. And I think that those are things that I think that it's just, although that you'd say I'm not racist or I'm not anti-Asian, yet when you see Asian hands and Asian faces serving you, you automatically, maybe it's not intentional, but in your mind that this is what you feel is worth, what you feel the labor is worth. And so when next time you go out to eat, and when you patronize Asian businesses, and you go to that dry cleaner, for example, I hate to stereotype, when you go to that dry cleaner, you're fine paying 99 cents to have your shirt cleaned. But when you go to a white-owned business or a non-Asian-owned business, you have no qualms about paying many times more because it's who's behind the counter. And so those are things I experience a lot of times, and I think that sometimes people say, well, they don't say derogatory things, they don't say racial slurs, but these types of actions, I would argue, are even more hurtful and even more damaging, because it instills a sense of value and a worth upon, as Neelam said, this invisible labor. It's just people that are viewed as people that are on the auxiliary, are there to serve a more dominant culture. So I just challenge those that are listening in, think about some of these experiences we have. I think that you'll find that among Asian Americans, much like many of my colleagues on this panel, my parents were refugees and were immigrants to this country, and didn't have mastery of the English language. They didn't have an education. So a lot of immigrants gravitated towards these types of invisible labor jobs. And so it certainly gives me a perspective, having been born here and having been able to have the privilege of being able to go to school and be able to get an education. It is something that I challenge us to think about next time when we are out in the community and interfacing with our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities.
Thank you, Daniel. I know every time I hear from somebody who's been to a Vietnamese restaurant and they say, oh, the food was great, but it's so expensive, it just is like nails on a chalkboard for me, because it almost becomes a ceiling as to how far Vietnamese cuisine can go in America. Having lived in San Francisco, where there are fancy Vietnamese restaurants and people balk at paying more than $20 for an entree there, because they just cannot conceive of Vietnamese food being worth that much. And that's heartbreaking.
One more example, I would say, Caitlin, just to piggyback off of that, I grew up when my parents were, I just came to this country. We would set up food stands at different fairs and festivals, at the street fair, like at the Rose Festival or the Bite of Oregon and such. And so I remember growing up watching people would line up to pay $5 for or $6 for a corn dog. Yet every time we would give them a $3 chicken skewer and says, "This is all I get? Just one?" Or you'll pay $5 for cotton candy, yet we charge $1.50 for a spring roll. And those are kind of things where, again, it's just a corn dog and chicken skewer is not on the same level. So those are things where I think those are things I think that as a child, watching how people interact with my parents, and they would try to bargain my parents, and, well, how much, give me 2 for that price? That's too expensive. Those are things that I think have been ingrained into my upbringing to think about how we're valued in this community. So
I think all of us can. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Kimby. What you were sharing, Daniel, reminded me of a really impactful talk I watched on YouTube. It was by Eddie Huang, the guy who produced Fresh Off the Boat, and recently had was a producer for a movie called Boogie, about a Chinese American kid, trying to play basketball and make it to, college basketball, Division I basketball. But he gave this talk about, his talk was titled No Coupons. So it was for him also having that awakening moment with his dad, who ran the restaurant, and said, "Dad, like, no more coupons. Like, let's charge the full price." And even when that first question, what is difficult about being API, like, my initial reaction was, I love being Korean American. Like, what's difficult about this? Coming off the heels of watching this really triggering video about the times that we're in right now. But I think it's going through where we don't charge our full worth for things, and really get into the space where, in the meantime, while we're wrestling with the idea of minority or the things that we've accomplished, being comfortable saying, this is what I'm worth, and this is what I'm willing to be taken for. Living in the basketball space where, you're judged on wins and losses, I think that's also, I do have some built-in advantages to the world that I live in, but it's similar. It's when I first got the job here at Lake Oswego, the young ladies that, Dia, Alicia, and Olivia, I had a chance to moderate a talk with them. And when they were talking about wrestling with their model minority, it really made me have to reflect on my adult life and say, what are some of those things that are put upon me that might not be fair? So it might be, oh, well, Coach Cho's really good at X's and O's. He's really good at drawing up plays, without knowing anything about me as a coach, not recognizing that my strengths are actually in player development, because I can play the game, right? And there's an assumption that comes that says, well, he probably didn't play. He probably really studied really hard to get to that position. And so, but controlling that narrative to have that sense of pride to say, you know what, this is what I'm worth. And what makes me worth my full price is, and then going down and listing the things and taking control of that narrative so that people don't just assume. That's been a really interesting process the last 6 years being in this position.
Thanks for that, Coach Cho. Oh man, I'm the words self-worth and self-compassion, they're just the forefront of my mind right now, but I won't get on that soapbox. Alicia, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share? I know everyone has had a little bit of time there.
Oh yeah, sure. So back to what Neelam was saying like a while ago when she was talking about how like we don't really have representation in like mental health or like just anyone we can talk to. I think that's something that's really impacted me a lot. Not necessarily like in the mental health field, but just like having like adults and just like having people that we can talk to easily that have shared like the same experiences with us, whether that be like at school or like in other places like that. It's something that I didn't really realize I was missing out on until actually when we started this union, and then we like started talking to Coach Cho, and then we realized like, wow, this is what it feels like to have like an adult that understands where we're coming from and understands our background, because like no matter like how good our other teachers are, and I love my other teachers and they're always really supportive, but like no matter how good they are, they just don't have that same experience as us. So I think something that makes it kind of hard being like a API student is just not having that representation like at school and things like that.
You know, when Alicia shared that we had a talk, you know, last time, we went through this exercise of talking about our heroes, our hardship, and the highlight. And Alicia mentioned that. You know, I don't know if there's decision makers in here who think about hiring practices for a district, but it's not good enough that the boys basketball coach is the only person, you know, and again, we've been fortunate to identify some, you know, there's been a few other recent, you know, hires of a Korean American teacher who's in the chemistry, you know, who's in the science department, and obviously we have the language arts, our foreign language teachers. But it's not enough, you know, and I think just events like this where, and I know there's other Asian Americans in our district who are parents, you know, I think for all of us to, for myself, I'm a second generation immigrant, you know, who is in this space, but I think it really makes us think about how do we go about proactively placing Asian Americans in, you know, in positions in our district.
Really great question to think about. I think about professional settings, school settings. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and if you would have asked me some of these questions when I was a child versus when I was a young adult and now a mother, I think I would respond to them all differently. I'm curious to know on the second question here, taking this more general concept of, you know, difficulty and pain. You have an audience here of Lake Oswego neighbors. When you think about your life in Lake Oswego or even Oregon as an Asian American, what do you wish your neighbors or peers knew? And feel free to share a little bit of that journey too, because I think that journey is important. It kind of informs what we want to share and how we share it.
Alicia, if you wouldn't mind, I think you said that you had something that you wanted to share with the group. If you wouldn't mind starting us off, that would be great.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, most of that was just gonna be like what I said earlier, just like how we kind of feel like, I guess like a sense of emptiness, I guess, when we walk around, and it makes me happy to see like on this panel right here that like basically everyone here except the moderators, they're like either working for a school district or like working for the city, because like a lot of times that's what we lack a lot, is just like having that representation over there and having someone to talk to. But also, I guess another thing that I would say I wish like what others knew is that like I feel like people always like try to like distance themselves, or like they're like, oh well, you're like Asian and you're something. Well, I'm also Asian American and I'm one of you too. Like it's just like they put a barrier there that I feel like doesn't need to be there, because at the end of the day, like I was born here just like you. Like I've been to LO schools my whole life just like you. Like I do like the same extracurriculars as you too. So I feel like there needs to be like that. They need to like break down these barriers, thinking that like we're different from them, because at the end of the day, like we share a lot of similar experiences, and a lot of the differences that they like to point out, I think, are kind of unnecessary.
I can jump in on, oh, Daniel, do you want to jump in? Feel free.
You know, if on the topic of if there's things that, you know, we'd like our neighbors to know about the community, is that you know, whether you are aware of it or not, there is this certainly in this community here in Lake Oswego, there is a certain expectation, and it's expectations in not just, you know, how we conduct ourselves at work, but it's also how we conduct ourselves in our neighborhoods, in our schools, because there's you know, one of the things I think that, you know, having kind of watched my parents come to this country as immigrants. And I think it's been ingrained in me, I guess, but now it's even more amplified living in a community like this, is that, you know, you never want to give the community a reason to blame you for something that goes wrong, whether that be, and I remember when we were growing up that it was made sure we never allow the grass to grow too long, and to make sure that we didn't do something too wild with our, you know, in the backyard with how we did landscaping or built a shed in the back. Those are things where I think about that, you know, when I go with my kids. You know, I've had to have difficult conversations with my own children. I have 2 young daughters, and I have to remind them, you know, that you know, it's different. I hate to say it's different for people like us, because we can't get away with a lot of things that other people would. And I think there's a lot of pressure to, there's even more so when you're a part of a family that is already part of the minority, and you are out in the community, that you make sure that you are projecting the right image, saying the right things, you know, acting in a certain way that doesn't conflict with what the greater society wants to see you act. And so it's almost as if when I leave the house, and those of you that know me personally too, you'll hear me on the phone sometimes. I speak Vietnamese almost as fluent as I do in English. And so I will go back and forth between on the phone, sometimes at City Hall, in between meetings, and I'll take a phone call, and I'm just going back and forth between English and Vietnamese. And I kind of get these looks that, and then I forget, oh, you know, even though I'm speaking to my kids or my wife, I should only speak only in English, so as not to make people in the surrounding, within earshot, feel uncomfortable, as if I've got something to hide or say, but it's just how I naturally converse. So there's this a constant pressure at all levels, I think, that is, there's an expectation. And when we do well, I'll be frank, we're rewarded. I think we're accepted, and we are able to excel and given opportunities. And we've also learned, I think, that where I grew up in Camas, Washington, which was back in the 80s and 90s. We were the minority. We were back then, there was no such thing as Asian. We were Orientals. You know, we were, oh, you're one of the Oriental kids. And so we learned all through high school. I learned that that's who we were. And it wasn't until when I got to college and I discovered there is such a thing as Asian studies. There are people that actually study this. There's an Asian art department. There's such a thing as Asian art. So those are things that I think that it's been an experience, right? I think that having grown up in a place where you are one of 2 Asian families, you learn, I think, and I come out of that with a certain expectation, and and I guess I carry it throughout my life, that you have to project a certain image. There's that pressure, and I think and I'm discovering it's not just. And I often will say, well, it's because I grew up in a town like that. But I also discovered that I meet people that grow in places like, you know, Southern California, or in places where there are a lot more Asian American communities, that they too also have similar feeling that pressure to conform to a certain standard, lest they be considered disruptive or not part of the community.
Go ahead, Dr. Liu, take it away.
Okay, I would like to also suggest that we all have an open mind when it comes to our neighbors, when it comes to somebody who doesn't look like us. And that goes both ways. right? We clearly have very different ways to celebrate our lives. We have very different traditions. We have very different perceptions about how things are. So I think I'm glad you organized such an activity, because this is a great opportunity for us to talk about who we are and the way we are, right? And then eventually, hopefully it's no longer the we versus them or the we versus you, because again, we are all humans, right? Our yard might look different, right? Because we constantly want to look for a fruit tree that grew up in our backyard back home, right? So that is one way for us to all increase the understanding of each other and eventually learn from each other, right? Another interesting thing I feel like, you know, a few panelists mentioned about language. You know, there are lots of advantages of speaking another language, right? Which is not quite widely accepted in this country. For instance, if you speak Chinese, the back part of your brain actually lights up. And then if you speak English, the little bit different part of your brain lights up, right? That probably also applies to other Asian languages as well, because we do activate different parts of our brains to talk and to think. So think about anybody who looks different from you. That includes me thinking about someone else who doesn't look like me as someone who comes with an asset. That person speaks a different language. That person has a very different lifestyle. There must be a good reason why your neighbor has a different lifestyle, right? So as a part of the community and as a community member who lives here daily, like Alicia said, some people were born here. They go to school just like you go to school. You know, we take care of our yard in the way that we think is the best. So it's not only that we have to tolerate each other, we need to understand each other a little better. So we don't say things that comes out of ignorance, right? You know, we happen to have a leader who is so ignorant that we would think that his kindergarten teachers probably should have said something different, right? When he was a kindergartner. So basically, I think this increased understanding of each other will be critical for all of us to come together for this country not to be so divided, right? We really need to understand each other.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Olivia says she wanted to jump in there, and then after Olivia, let's have Neelam speak. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the question was like what I'd want like my neighbors in the community to know about like my experience as AAPI. And I feel like you should know that like it does happen like here, like I do experience like microaggressions and like racism here, like in LO, like at school, because obviously like that's where I spend most of my time, like in elementary school. And I remember this specific time I was at the DMV, and my mom, like she had allergies because it was like March, it was my birthday, and I was getting my license, and it was pretty crowded in there, and no one like wanted to sit next to me or anything. I had this whole like row to myself, and my mom like we're aware like coronavirus was like happening, but it wasn't completely like school hadn't closed or anything. So she had allergies and she had to go sit in the car because she didn't want anyone to feel like she had the coronavirus, and just because like she was Asian. And that's like kind of tough to like experience, especially like on your birthday. So yeah, that's definitely something that happens in the community.
I think I want to just, oh, go ahead, Neelam. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that was very, very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. You know, I'm so impressed by our young people on this panel. You are really our future, and yeah, I just, you know, couldn't say more about your leadership, and thank you so much for being here and talking and sharing your stories tonight. For me, you know, what I'd like people to know about is, you know, I know as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we're viewed as the perpetual foreigners, but I was born here. I was born in the Los Angeles area. You know, my parents came here seeking education and economic opportunity and a better way of life. And I moved here to Lake Oswego when I was a teenager, and then returned here after having gone to school and working in Los Angeles and for a few years in Northern California. And, you know, I always thought of myself as American, but yet a foreigner because of the way people saw me. And then the other thing, you know, I wish people knew is how proud I am of seeing someone like Kamala Harris in office. When she was accepting the nomination to run for the vice presidency, I remember in her acceptance speech, she was giving thanks to her family, her amazing mother, Shamala Gopalan Harris, who told her, you know, you might be the first, but make sure you're not the last. And I remember very clearly hearing her use a word, chitti, which is a South Indian word, the area that her mom is from, which translates to auntie. And I remember just tearing up and feeling like, wow, you know, like I'm in on it, and just feeling so proud to see you know, a woman of similar background who was raised by an Indian woman to be a proud Black woman. And that, you know, just, you know, is amazing to me.
Piggybacking on that statement, Neelam, even though, you know, I'm not an Indian woman, I felt tremendous pride when Kamala Harris rose to that position in our government as well. And I just want to make like a general statement. I hear a lot of people talking on our panel, talking about microaggressions and these slights and just this subtle, sneaky racism. And I think sometimes people listening in might think, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It's not like, you know, it's not the overt racism that's really obvious that we see caught on, you know, social media and a video, and that person is doxxed and loses their job. It's not that type of racism. I think in Lake Oswego, it's a predominantly, you know, affluent, highly educated community. So we're not going to find folks like that, but we are going to find, you know, like many people on this panel, the students and the adults are describing, we're going to find a lot of microaggressions. And in some ways, those can be just as harmful because they kind of slide into our subconscious, and people who hear them, sometimes even I hear them, it might take me several days to even realize that it was a dig on my identity, or that, hey, that wasn't cool. But, you know, so that type of racism, it's really harmful because it just, anyone can make that mistake, and people hearing it don't always notice it, and they might repeat it. And before you know it, it just becomes part of everyone's subconscious and it's accepted. And over a lifetime, that harm becomes compounded.
Just want to add a couple thoughts here. In the planning process of this, I had told Kim B, my neighbor and friend, that I would just be a moderator in this and step back. And in thinking about it, I really was thinking about the Lake Oswego audience. I was afraid that out of 9 people, the 9 faces you see, a third face that was Vietnamese with refugee parents would then perpetuate that narrative again. And I didn't want to contribute to that. But I've been here for 6 years. I grew up in Spokane, and I will say that it wasn't just microaggressions. I grew up having people call me a gook, telling me that my people killed their people. A 2nd grade peer told me that to my face. And I had to go home and ask my mom why anyone would do that. I had to support my little sister who went to school and had chink written all over her locker. These were the things I experienced as a child. And as I got older, you know, these subtle comments, they were actually met with a lot of aggression. Where are you from was never a, I want to get to know you, Tam. Where are you from was, we don't like your answer, and we're going to keep asking you until you tell us the answer that we want to hear. Any questions were in professional settings, I noticed. Keep your head down, share your success, and then you'll be seen, and then we'll hear you. And so for me right now, in the stage that I'm in, I'm rewriting my narrative. And you know, I'm very conscious of spaces I want to be in right now, and I'm personally choosing to be in BIPOC spaces. In the planning, when we did a little quick run through and I saw all these faces, it filled me with joy. It filled my bucket. Because when I go out my door in Lake Oswego, I don't see this. I don't see what your screens are looking at right now. I have to consciously decide to create that community for myself and my children. It doesn't just happen, and it won't just happen. I have to make that community on my own.
Thank you so much for thank you, Tam, for sharing those words. I'm sure a lot of us on the panel can relate to those feelings. I'm going to jump to the next question that we have on our list here today. The next one is, what do you wish your parents knew about the hate or challenges you've encountered being API? And Olivia, I'm going to call on you just because you had told me before that you wanted to answer, you wanted to share your answer for this. Take it away, Olivia.
Okay, this is kind of cool because I think my dad is on this meeting, so he'll get to hear firsthand, I guess, what I want him to know. I kind of thought about this. I wrote a couple of notes because we got the questions beforehand, and I just think, like, I know, like, in a different generation, like they were taught, like, not to share their experiences, like, with racism or microaggressions and stuff. And they're used to it by now, but like me growing up in like this generation being more open to talk about and stuff, and like, I don't know, I feel like seeing it is a lot going on firsthand, that it might take like a while for me to like process everything, and that I can't really like internalize it, or that I should internalize it, I guess. Not that they want me to internalize it. I just want to put that out there. They're very good parents and they want me to like share my story and stuff. But that it's a little bit harder for me to like brush things off, or like, I don't know, keep my cool, I guess. Yeah.
I think this question was somewhat intended for the younger folks on our panel. So Dia or Alicia, do you have anything else to add? I'm happy to add too after you, but I'll give you the floor first. Any other not so young folks on our panel? Okay, I'll share then. I'll start, but I hope someone else will jump in after me. What do I wish my parents knew about the hate or challenges I've encountered? I kind of alluded to this earlier, as I consider the type of racism I've encountered to be more subtle and more microaggressions. But as you could tell from my talk earlier in the program, those microaggressions and those slights in my childhood and in my teen years going into my young adulthood, they shaped me. And, you know, over time, they compound and they're harmful. But one thing I wish that my parents knew, though, is that I don't begrudge them for not talking to me about racism. And I don't judge them for being silent in the face of it. I feel like they had different challenges that they faced, and they made sacrifices for me, and I have privileges that they don't. So like Tam, I'm also, you know, committed to stopping the cycle of silence and speaking up and fighting for others. And that's what I would like them to know.
As a educator for so many years, I would like to have all parents, especially all immigrant parents, to pay attention to their children, believe in their children when their children share a story like the microaggression that goes on in the schools all the time and consistently goes on in the schools. The form of discrimination does not minimize the hurt. The form of discrimination simply tells us how the aggressor is treating the victim. It does not make the victim less painful, right? So I used to tell the immigrant parents or all parents not only to take your children seriously, but also invite your children to share what is going on and share their stories with the school board, with their teachers, with their school leaders, right? We cannot always be silent anymore. It does not work. It has to stop.
Go ahead, Neelam.
I wish, and I hope my parents know how proud I am of them, and how honored I am to be their daughter, how they've shaped and molded me into the person that I am today. And I owe so much to them. I remember, you know, being younger and struggling, you know, with, you know, people making fun of their accents, and all those things that as a young child, you just want to fit in. And, you know, I just, you know, now being a parent myself, I, you know, have a totally different perspective on how hard it must have been for them coming to a new country where they didn't really know anybody, you know, pre-cell phone, pre-email, back, you know, when they couldn't communicate easily with their family back home, and how much courage and strength it took for them to raise us. So, you know, I'm so grateful to my parents for everything they've done for me.
So not that I'm not a grateful child, but as a parent in my 40s, I think I would want my parents, and my mom has been calling me nonstop during this call. I want my parents to know that the weight of responsibility was heavy, and it continues to be. To be told as a child that don't make any mistakes because you represent all of us with black hair and almond eyes. That's a lot. It's a lot to carry through and sit in class and know, like, just, you don't do anything wrong. Then how do you do that and still enjoy and thrive truly, and then be an adult and advocate for yourself in a professional setting? How do I advocate for myself and see my self-worth when it's just be quiet and be responsible for all of us? I'm going to work for a long time to unravel that. And I think it's going to be a hard conversation to have with my parents, but we kind of tackle it bit by bit. Daniel, did you want to say something? I think we're kind of getting a little close to time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, a lot of things that you, Tam, you shared and Kim, you shared, and we have similar backgrounds with parents coming around the same time. But I also think about too, we're aware, in our generation, we're aware of what's going on. And I think that sometimes there was that language barrier. And so I think in some ways that language barrier actually helped shield them from some of the more painful things that I know, had they known was being said about them, would be even more hurtful. But I also know that they did recognize, they did feel some of the discrimination and some of the hate towards them. But I have to also recognize that the previous generation had this wonderful grace about them. And I think that although they have been slighted and although they have been mistreated, there's just something that they still held their head high. They still had dignity. And that's something I think that I would like my parents to know, that that's something that we learn from you. It's something that we, although we will continue to speak out against anti-Asian hate, and we will continue to be the generation that will speak out, we also respect what you've gone through and the grace that you've shown to those that overtly show hate towards you. And that's something that I have a hard time dealing with. When people, when you know people don't have these ill feelings towards you, the natural reaction is to just return the favor or treat them the same way. But I think that that's something that that we often will, I think, as we continue to reconcile, as we continue to kind of move towards a society where we're all valued, I think that's something that we can learn from our parents too, is that how do we treat those that may not quite understand it quite yet with love and compassion and that grace that they've demonstrated.
Thank you, Daniel, for injecting some much needed positivity into the conversation. I think that's actually a really good segue. Tam, don't you think if we maybe just jump ahead to the last question to spend a few minutes on that?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe we can just go around too. We wanted to end our discussion on a positive note, but if we just went around.
And the question that we were thinking everyone would be great for everyone to answer would be, what do you love about being API? Marshall, I hate to pick on you, but you did say from in the beginning of the program that you're like, what? I love being Korean. So why don't you start us off?
Sure. I mean, hey, it's our time, Bong Joon-ho won the Academy Award last year for Parasite. We had another winner this year from Best Supporting Actress in this movie Minari, which actually when I watched that, it felt so close to home for we just coming on the heels of talking about our parents. My father, we moved here in 1986. I was born in 1976. I was 10 years old, to Springfield, Oregon. So similar to Daniel and Tam, like Spokane, Cam is Springfield. I went through a time where I was the only Korean American in my school. And in the immigrant life, for my father, he managed a 54 unit apartment complex, which actually, ironically, instead of having like the stereotypical dry cleaners or grocery store or the corner market, my parents were around for everything. So I think about the presence that they had in my life, and much of how I coach and how I run our program is similar. I'm just around all the time. Like we have, our extreme risk, COVID, protocols right now. We can only have 6 kids in the gym at a time. And my players, they just know I live here. So, if they want to come in and shoot, for a little bit, I can let them in, and I'm holding the Zoom meeting, but there's, 6 of our young men shooting in the gym right next door. So some of that, I think about legacy a lot these days. And I think about the legacy of my parents who are, in their early 70s. It's lived out through me. I love being API to the point where, and even to the second part about what do you wish your neighbors in Lake Oswego knew? Like, I want my neighbors to know that I love being in Lake Oswego. Like, it's come with the stereotypes of what it used to be, but where it's headed is where, I want to focus on. So I'm proud enough to the point where I embrace my name. I'm over myself. I you can imagine with the last name like Cho, there's a lot of, the chow mains or the cho-cho trains and the juvenile, play on my name. It's something, again, like all of us have kind of shared, we don't know how to wear that. And as at 45 years old now this month, and a father of 2, and being the face of a prominent high school basketball program to the rest of the state, or even on the West Coast, I'm happy to put my name next to our city. So, this past year, I think, again, coming on the heels of like no coupons and knowing my worth, I started printing off t-shirts that said Lake Cho instead of Lake O. So even the talk that I gave with these young people, it's being unapologetically Lake Cho. And what does that mean? It's taking what used to be what people could make fun of with my last name and say, no, this is my last name. Learn how to say it. And also understand that my immigrant experience of assimilating and giving up my Korean name of Chung-ho and taking on the name of Marshall, all of those things, it's part of my story, my immigrant story, and it's okay. And if I'm comfortable putting myself out there and putting my name out there, maybe, Olivia will play something along with her last name and slap it on the t-shirt or a hat, or, Alicia will be comfortable, wearing her Asian skin, in our district, and Dia, will be, we talked about, her mother and her amazing journey from, being in med school in Russia to here to, like all of us can take pride in what our last name really, where it comes from, and even, what our first names even mean. Why did our parents give us the name? My Korean name is Chung-ho. My grandfather, who was an orange farmer who survived the Korean War in Jeju Island, who sent 7 of his children in post-war Korea, all to secondary education to get their college degrees. He gave, and it's a name that comes from the Chinese characters that means to govern widely. So it's at my age now embracing that and saying, well, my impact should be wider than Lake Oswego, but living, thinking globally, but acting locally, I have to have a presence here. And by modeling that, then maybe other Asian American coaches who their parents are saying, hey, don't go into that. There's no money in that. But how are you going to feed your family? But hey, if that's your passion, that's what my parents allowed me to do. And so I know from my position, that's a dangerous thing for a lot of parents to hear when I have my, I'm a very proud Oregon Duck. I'm an Oregonian as much as I'm an American, as much as I'm a Korean. But, part of me also says, hey, kids, it doesn't matter like what college you go to, that would be like I'm sure some of these parents, Olivia's dad might be like, no, don't listen to Coach Cho, but also understanding that I went and got, pursued my master's degree at Columbia University. I think probably as much for my parents, even though they didn't really care, than for myself, because I wanted them to go to church and say, yeah, my son has a graduate degree from an Ivy League university, so those are the burdens, again, like we talked about, we carry, but I think it starts with loving yourself, man. Like, I love my identity here. I'm in a space where if I start to do that, I know that my children will see it, and they can own it. And when those moments do come of my microaggression, you can stand up and say, that's not okay. And I think I'm in a space where I can do that now for myself. But that's what I want to do. In intentionally having these conversations in my program. Even I manage 5 teams. I have about 55 young men who I oversee. I'm intentional about teaching them Korean phrases and Korean words, and letting them know that it's okay to learn something new and learn something that they hadn't heard before. I feel like I just gave a locker room talk or something, but sorry, I can't help. Yeah, I guess
it was great. It was great. Loved it.
Had the coach mode on, and I know it's been a long evening. I really appreciate the 100+ folks that showed up, and it's great to be a part of this group tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach Cho. Do the rest of you want to just unmic and share? What do you love about you? Take that energy Coach Cho just put out there. What do you love about being Asian Pacific Islanders?
Well, I guess I would love to say that about being Asian American is that finally we see our name, the Nguyen last name. For those that may not know, Nguyen is the most common Vietnamese name out there. It's there's almost like I read somewhere it's like 60% of all Vietnamese people have that same last name. But for me, I think I'm really proud to be Asian American, especially now. Is that now we're able to have the young people to follow in our footsteps, and I think that one of them, in thinking back over the past couple of years, just one thing that really stuck out with me when I ran for office and I was sworn in at City Hall and I saw my name as Councilor Nguyen. I think about that now that I want to see a Councilor Lee. I want to see a President Gupta. I want to see Madam Vice President Chi. So these are things that I think that now it's something that I'm so excited to be a part of, because to see this conversation happening, it is something that I know that it's long time in coming. Our parents may not have seen it, and I recognize too there are people that, like my parents, that saw myself getting involved in leadership, right? And they were very concerned, and I think but I think now while they were trying to discourage me, said just do what you do best and not get involved. But I'm really proud to see them really have a different attitude, that hey, actually you're not just crazy, that what did we teach you, that kind of mentality. But now that they're actually embracing it and encouraging their grandchildren and all the young people that are coming up behind us. So I think I'm just so glad that we're able to kind of help lead this. And as an aside, I've said this many times too, that now for all the Asian kids that can bring rice and pork and eggs to school, that is a huge accomplishment.
Fish sauce.
That I
know we made it. We could bring fish sauce.
Oh, fish sauce too. So that is something that I was sharing with Kim V on a phone call, is that now I don't feel like my kids have to buy a Lunchable. I was dreading having to buy Lunchables to bring for them so that they could have an American lunch just like the other kids. And so yeah, I'm just really proud to be an Asian American in this time in our history.
I think we are about the end of our time. And do any of the students want to add any final thoughts about what makes them proud to be API?
Yeah, I guess I'll add something. So what I really love about being API is that I just have like these 2 communities with me, kind of, because I'm Asian, but I'm also like American, of course. And like knowing that like if I wasn't API, I wouldn't be sitting here tonight, and I probably wouldn't have met like all of you, and I wouldn't have been able to hear about all these experiences. Like it makes me happy and proud to know that I'm API and know that like I have so many, great other people in this community to look up to. And then also what I really love about it is when people are genuinely just interested about our culture and like want to learn more about us, not in a way that's like, oh, where did you come from? Like why and stuff like that. But when people are genuinely interested about like our language and our food, and they just want to learn more and get to learn more about our lifestyle. It's really freeing to be able to, you know, teach someone about like my life and have them be just so amazed, like, wow, like this is part of your life. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of great.
Thank you, Alicia. With that, I think we are about the end of our time. I just want to thank everyone again on our panel for being here tonight, sharing your stories, your pain, your hopes, your fears, and your joy. We all know it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, but we think there's power in vulnerability. And as I said in the beginning of the program, our hope in sharing this discussion with our community is to foster understanding and empathy, and in so doing, building resistance or resilience within our own API community, and also allyship and solidarity in our broader community. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Tam. She's going to share some community resources and events that you all can look into to support the API community. Take it away, Tam.
All right, everyone. So I just put in the chat a link to a resource. It's ways you can support your AAPI community. Feel free to look through it. I think it'll be sent out in the follow-up email to those who came out today. But just real quick, it talks about, you know, checking in with your AAPI family and friends. Those who are on social media, I'm sure you've seen that. It's always like check in with whichever group is being targeted. Just want to ask you to press pause before you do that. Check in if it's appropriate for that relationship, and check in if it's genuinely about the other person and not about you. If you only know that person virtually and online, or you haven't spoken to them in over a decade, a random "how are you doing," just checking in, probably may not be received well. So check yourself, please. There's also several links to on how to report bias incidents locally as well as nationally, and multilingual resources. We encourage you to take the time to learn from BIPOC leaders, amplify those voices and the people who've been doing the work for a very long time. There's also several bystander intervention harassment training opportunities, and there's a link in the document. You can go to their calendar to find out when the different trainings are available. And there are some that are specific to the Asian community, but also for other communities as well, other BIPOC communities. There's also a list of local AAPI owned businesses, and it's just a starting list. So please know that it may not have everyone, but Kimby and I tried to list as many as possible. It's another great way for you to show your support. And then I also just ask you, just because you're eating Asian food, are you supporting an Asian owned business? Maybe not necessarily. So look into that. And then there are several upcoming events this month. Since May is Asian Pacific Heritage Month, we have several events with links. And I encourage you to kind of delve into those, because a lot of the websites have their own calendars that you can sign up for. So Apano has an event, Rise Against Hate Oregon, Portland State University, their Asian faculty will be speaking, having a panel. And then Lake Oswego has a few events, including the Equity Summit that will be coming up as well. And I believe also a possible AAPI Heritage Month celebration in Lake Oswego. What? Daniel, do you want to plug that?
Yeah, if I can let the cat out of the bag. We've been planning an AAPI event. Actually, had one planned for the month of February in honor of the Lunar New Year, but that happened to be the weekend we had that the once in a century ice storm, which I think it worked out to be in our destiny. So now we get to have it in May, and the date is going to be Sunday, May 23rd at Millennium Park Plaza. And it's going to be a celebration to celebrate some of the cultural traditions that we have in our communities. And there's going to be a lion dance as well as dragon dance performance. For those that may not know the difference between dragons and lions, come see. It is quite a spectacular show with live acrobatic performances by the White Lotus lion dance troupe, along with drummers. And I think there's going to be just some brief speakers to kind of introduce the event. And it would be a very beautiful, colorful event. We're all praying for beautiful weather, but hopefully y'all can come. And and it makes me personally proud, because it's something I've been asking for a long time, to have an Asian inspired event sponsored by the city on city grounds. And so this will be the first, I believe. So I hope that y'all can come support. It'll be at noon on May 23rd.
Thank you, Daniel. Oh, I just wanted to give Daniel some props. Not only did Daniel bring this event to our community, he is also spearheading a proclamation that the City Council is going to review and approve, I believe is the right word. And that's going to be in honor of AAPI Heritage Month. So thank you, Daniel, so much.
Credit is due to our mayor, Joe Buck, who I think is hopefully still on the call. So thanks for his support as well. So he's been a very strong ally of our DI efforts here in town. So I'm so glad to be working with him and the rest of council on this.
And Kimby, if I can just really quickly mention the school board, we actually passed 2 resolutions at this past Monday's board meeting. One recognizing last month, April, as Arab American Heritage Month, and another one recognizing May as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month.
Fantastic. We all love institutional recognition.
Well, we want to thank all the panelists again and thank all of you for hanging in there with us and listening in on our discussion. We have one last poll that I think you may have gotten a little sneak peek of at the beginning of the meeting. But one last poll. Kimby, do you want to introduce that?
Sure. We just want to spotlight one of the resources that Tam had shared, the bystander intervention training. We're going to conclude tonight with just not a fun, well, it's a poll that's supposed to be to kind of pique your interest. There's a scenario there, and I'm just going to quickly just summarize it. You're at a grocery store, you're in line, and you witness a customer hurling anti-Asian slurs and other harassment at an elderly Asian customer paying for groceries. So what do? There's a few choices down there. So if you can just choose the one that you honestly think would be your response, we can look at the poll afterwards and discuss what answers rise to the top. John, thanks for getting that poll ready.
It was pure luck, Kimby.
I'll let you end it when you think is the right time.
I think it just goes for 2 minutes, but
okay. All right.
If nobody else is going, I can certainly stop it.
Yeah, maybe we stop it right there. Okay, let's take a look at the answers we have here. It's interesting to see what our community response would be. It looks like the top choices are: you would stand between the victim and the harasser, tell the harasser to leave the Asian customer alone. Interesting, great. So Tam and I took this bystander training, and though we are certainly no experts in this topic after attending just one training, there were some takeaways that we can share with you. One of the takeaways is there isn't really a right or appropriate choice for everybody. So much of it depends on the circumstances of the situation you're in, safety considerations, your own personal comfort level, and also just an awareness of your own biases that might be clouding your judgment or your ability to perceive the situation accurately. So really, Any of the choices besides the last two, which I'll get to, could be a right choice, or a combination of the options could be the right choice or the right response. That said, going to the last two options, another takeaway from the training is it's never okay to respond to racism or hate or violence with more racism, hate, or violence. So the last two options are definitely not advisable. So if you found this poll interesting, or it piques your interest and you would like to learn more, please check out the Hollaback bystander intervention training that's being offered. There's multiple training dates available, and I believe the links to register were shared in the resources document that was distributed before this meeting. So that concludes our API portion of the programming tonight. Thank you all again for joining us in this conversation and opening up your hearts and minds to the API community. I've already thanked the speakers on our panel, so I'll just end by reiterating our collective thanks as a community to Respond to Racism for providing us with this platform for us to gather, share, learn from each other, and to grow as a community. And with that, I will hand over the mic to Willie and Terry for closing remarks. Thanks, everyone.
Myself. Okay, thank you again, Kim V and Tam, our moderators for tonight. Thank you to all of the panelists and the programming team that put this whole thing together, this whole presentation together. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a good learning experience for us. And as we increase our knowledge and our understanding of each other, our cultures, and what we go through, and see that we're not so different in terms of having to deal with unpleasant things because of the color of our skin or the language we speak or whatever it is that appears to be different from, and I'm going to say this and I'll probably get in trouble, but I'll say it, white America. In terms of white America, what that standard is for what is the right way to wear your hair, the right way to the right kind of clothes to wear. And I could go on and on and on about different things, but thank you so much tonight. And we're all learning. I make mistakes too. So please forgive me and don't ever hesitate when I make a mistake to call me out on it, because I blame it to my senior year, blame it on my senior years, but that's also a tale. It's who I am. And so with that, we have another poll, and Terry has some announcements. Terry, are you doing your announcements before or after the poll?
Why don't I do it during, because we're just about out of time.
Okay, I will be quiet then. I'll thank you all for being here tonight.
You don't have to be quiet. Leave it like that. If people will just stay on for just a couple more minutes. And I also want to say thank you so much to Kim V and Tam for organizing this tonight, and to the speakers. I learned a lot and have a lot to learn, and I really appreciate people sharing their stories. The Lake Oswego City Council meets this Tuesday at 5:30, and on the meeting agenda is an overview of Lake Oswego Police Department's hiring practices and training. So we'll hope that you'll listen in to that. On Friday, May 7th, with the library, Respond to Racism is hosting Samurai in the Oregon Sky. It's a beautiful film. We'll hold a discussion afterwards, and it's about the Japanese pilot Nobuo Fujita, the only pilot to bomb the US mainland during World War II. Probably a story you haven't heard before. But it's also a story of the friendship that he developed with the small Oregon town near where he dropped the bomb. So register on the RTR website. Respond to Racism on Instagram Live. We'll have special guests from the Lake Oswego Black Student Mentorship Program, and that's on May 10th at 7 p.m. at the Respond to Racism Instagram page. The Equity Summit's been mentioned a couple times tonight, and that registration is open, and you can get the link to that in the email that was sent to you earlier today and also on the RTR website. We have a book group starting. It's a series of 3 books, 3 discussions. The books will be on African American literature, and the first discussion will be held on June 13th at 2 p.m. And the book is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And the library and RTR and Regan Parker and the bookstore are donating 200 free copies of the book. So if you register to attend the event, we'll set some books aside because the free book giveaway is at the same time as the Equity Summit. We need a few people to help facilitate the discussion at these book groups. So you can email reganparker@gmail.com if you would like to help facilitate. If you're a facilitator with RTR for our community meetings, this would be a good opportunity for you to step in and help with that. As Mayor Buck mentioned, there are openings for Lake Oswego boards and commissions. All of you tonight have been well trained for this, and it's time to step up. You've had 2 or 3 or more years of coming to our meetings and being well educated, and we hope that you will go out and represent RTR, the community, and the city by joining a board or commission. And lastly, the Rotary will be premiering on May 18th at 8 p.m. Special people who will be receiving awards for service above self, educational excellence. And there may be somebody you know who's getting an award. So tune into that. And I think that is everything. Good night, everybody, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Tam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Have a good evening. A good weekend.